What if I tell you that complimenting a student here in America may get you in trouble with a school or with a parent? Yes. What is up, YouTube? This is Keith, your casual teacher. In this video, I'm going to share to you guys some of the cultural differences that I've seen inside a classroom. This is based on my 4 years of experience, and it might differ from other people. So, take this with a grain of salt. Man, when I think about the first time that I taught here in America, it makes me cringe, That. Also, stick around at the end of the video where I will talk about an important document that you have to remember and understand and memorize, because if you don't follow this document, you might get sued or worse, even get fired from the school. Alright, let's start. The first one is classroom routine. So this is the first one that I noticed when I first taught here in America. So back in the Philippines, we all have our own, routines, like, or let's say saying a prayer at the beginning of class, have everyone stand and greet you in unison, or maybe assigning a cleaners at the end of class. There's none of that here in America. Well, maybe in your Catholic schools, but definitely not here in your regular schools. Well, I'm not saying that you can't implement a routine in your classroom. Well, you can. Well, maybe you can have them line up outside and greet them one by one and, do those fancy handshakes that you see online, giving high fives, hugs. I mean, you can only implement routines to some extent. You cannot force the students to start with a prayer or greet every teacher or visitor that gets inside your classroom. The next one that I noticed that is different from the Philippines and America is how the teachers and the students interact with one another. If another teacher or a principal or even a supervisor comes in your class, the students usually wouldn't care. Maybe some of them will say good morning, but definitely not all of them. They just don't care. Also, they don't usually stand when you ask them a question. If we call a student in the Philippines, that student will usually stand up and give their answers, but not here in America. Students usually just sit and, give the answer that you want. This is just how they usually are inside the classroom. Alright, here's another one. At least once in your career here in America, you'll get to encounter that one kid that mocks your accent. If you are like me, who is not very fluent in English, or has a thick accent, there will always be a kid that mocks. There will always be a kid that mocks you for it. If this happens, make it a learning experience for them. You can say something like the world is diverse, and that English is not the only language out there. Make them understand that not all people talks like them. In fact, there are more people in the world who doesn't have English as their native language. So maybe you can point that out. Aside from usual high fives or hugs, or handshakes, do not touch a student without a good and valid reason. No matter how close you are to the kid, you shouldn't touch them unless it's a safety issue. Especially if you are teaching in the middle school and high school, there are a bunch of kids that are usually very sensitive and they might interpret it differently, so just avoid touching them. Another thing that you have to be mindful of is giving compliments. In the Philippines, we are so used to giving compliments to a kid based on their look, or the way they dress, or how smart they are. In America, you might want to be careful with that. Choose your words wisely, I guess. You should avoid saying things like, "Oh my God, you're so sexy," or you have pretty eyes. When a kid or an adult hears you saying that, they might think of it differently, They might think of it as like, maybe sexual harassment or inappropriate behavior inside a classroom. So instead, you can say generic compliments like, "Oh wow, you are so awesome, man. I like your style, dude." Or "You look great today." Again, just think twice before you speak. That's the lesson here. The third difference that I noticed between America and the Philippines inside a classroom is when you are grading your papers. In the Philippines, we are used to putting a check mark beside the number if they got that number correctly. But here in America, it might mean differently. So it's really important that you explain to the students what those symbol means, because they're not used to seeing a check mark beside a number. Another thing is how you write your grade. Most students here in America will prefer you writing a letter grade rather than percentage. To save you the trouble of students asking you, it's better to write it in letter than in percentage. Okay, next one is lunch. Now this varies by school. Some schools have an hour lunch like us, but most schools have a lunch break of about 20 to 30 minutes. If you are in a small school like mine, you will be scheduled to watch the kids during lunch break. So, just keep that in mind. The fifth difference is the use of technology inside the classroom. Now, I haven't been in the Philippines for the past 6 years, so I don't know what the classroom setting is like now. But back in the day, we don't use a lot of technology when I first taught in the Philippines. But here, technology is a really big deal. It's even one of the criteria for accrediting a school. That means you have to learn or maybe research some of the tools that you have online that pertains to your subject. Most common ones are Google Classroom, Kahoot, and Quizlet. For math, I always use the online website desmos.com, which is a graphing and a calculator tool. They even have their own fun activities, so if you are a math teacher, definitely check it out. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I will share to you guys an important document that you have to understand and remember, okay? But don't worry though, because if you came here to America before the start of the school year, this is usually included in your pre-service training. The document that I'm talking about is called IEP and 504. Long story short, both IEP or the Individualized Education Program and 504 is a plan to offer formal help to K-12 students who are struggling in school. IEP are given to those students who have learning disabilities like autism, Down syndrome, ADHD, and others. Usually the child needs specialized instruction to progress in the school. 504, on the other hand, are given to students with any disabilities. And these disabilities must interfere with how they learn in school. An example of this would be hearing impairment, color blindness, what else? Speech impediment, and so on and so forth. As far as I remember, we don't have this in the Philippines, right? In the Philippines, students with disabilities are usually enrolled in a different school that specializes in their disability. I'm not sure about today though, so let me know in the comment section below how the Philippines handle disabilities now. These documents, the IEP and 504, are important because it contains the information that you need for their accommodation and modification. Accommodations remove barrier in the classroom to provide an equal opportunity for every kid to learn. An example of this is offering audio version of the classroom text to students with dyslexia, or maybe offer visual support for students with hearing impairment. Modifications, on the other hand, are changes to what is taught to a child and what is expected from her or him inside the classroom. An example would be giving a student a different reading material that is suited for his level. Again, I cannot stress this enough. You have to memorize all the IEPs and the 504s that you have in your class. Some families of these students have advocates or lawyers that would usually check from time to time if the accommodation or the modification were met in class. If you don't meet those requirements for the student, you might get a complaint, or worse, you might get sued and get fired. All I'm saying is that you have to be very careful with them, and I understand that it is an extra challenge for us since this is a completely new area of teaching that we haven't been taught in the Philippines. Alrighty guys, those are the cultural differences that I've seen in the classroom during my 4-year stay here in America. If you find this video helpful, make sure you like and subscribe so we can help more people like you who wishes to teach here in America. And if you haven't watched my other videos, please check out my channel. There are a lot of useful info, especially if you're gonna come here as a J1 visa teacher. This is Keith, your casual teacher, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.